The integument system has a couple accessory structures that are derived from it, and so let's start by looking at our nails, which are going to be scale-like modifications of the stratum corneum, which again, the stratum corneum is going to be the superficial most layer of the epidermis. All right, so when we look at our nail plate, it has a couple different regions. The first one is the free edge, and the free edge here is going to be that white portion that we see, and it's white because it doesn't have any blood vessels underneath it, and so that's why we are able to clip it and it doesn't hurt. Next, what we have is the pink nail body, and pink because now we have blood vessels underneath it. And then we also have the nail root, which we find right here, and this is going to be covered by skin, so we can't actually see this without it being too painful. And so the nail body is going to be covered by a layer of the epidermis that is going to be slightly pink in color, except for at the free edge. The nail matrix, which is going to be now the most proximal portion of the nail, and this is where we have mitosis occurring, and so this is where we'll have the growing portion of the nail bed. The lunula here of what we can see on our actual fingernails is going to be the part of the nail body caused by the stratum basale of the epidermis that is going to block off the capillaries within the dermis. And so that portion then too is going to be avascular. The second accessory structure of our integument system is going to be hair. And so hair is going to be composed of columns of keratinocytes that are growing from follicles that are found deep within the dermis or sometimes as deep as the hypodermis. And so we have three different regions or zones that we find within hair from deep to superficial. So the first is the hair bulb, all right, and this is where we have a swelling or a enlargement of the epithelial cells where the hair is going to originate from. And in this picture here, what we have is a layer of epithelial cells, and this is where the hair is going to start to grow from. The next superficial is going to be the root of the hair, and this is going to be the portion that's deep to the skin surface. And then lastly, what we see is going to be the shaft, and that's what's going to extend beyond the skin surface. With each hair, there is going to be a hair follicle that's going to surround it. Where within the hair follicle, what we find is our stem cells that are responsible for hair production, and so this is where we find cells that undergo mitosis. Also, what we find is going to be this erector pili muscle, which is a smooth muscle that's going to be attached to the hair shaft. And when we respond to different emotions, or sometimes if we have like a damaged nerve or very cold temperatures, these are going to contract and give us our goosebumps. And so those hairs are going to stand straight up. So the reason why we have our hair, very important, because this is for protection, especially for our head and as well as the rest of our body. Heat retention, so that this will help to block off heat from UV light. Also sensory reception, so this will help to trigger if there is something that is behind us or even small insects like mosquitoes. Also for visual identification, which is very unique to humans, and for chemical signal dispersal based on what hormones and molecules are being released when it enters into the glands. Now, also within the integument system, we have a couple of glands that we find. So we have two main types. We have sweat glands and oil glands. So let's start with looking at sweat glands, or these are also known as sudiferous glands, and they produce a watery solution that we know as sweat. These are going to be made of simple coiled tubular glands that are going to release different secretions that go to the pore on the skin surface. And so if we look in our little picture here, here you can see this is a Merocrine sweat gland, and it goes all the way to the pore. It's going to be derived typically within the reticular layer of the dermis, pass through the papillary, and then exit straight out of the epidermis to the surface of the body. So when we look at secretion, it's about 99% water, usually it's clear, and then this is actually controlled by the nervous system. And we find this like within the palms of our hand, soles of our feet, and then our forehead. Typically, this does not smell at all, but because it's mostly composed of water. Big reason why we have these is for thermal regulation, so that we are not overheated within the body. Also secretion of different molecules and ions, say that we don't need in the body anymore, and for protection. So when, on a hot day, we want to protect ourselves from UV light, and so this would help to create a barrier with that because of the ions. Doesn't make it completely opaque for us. And so here's an example in this picture of what it looks like under the microscope, where we have a coiling of these tubular cells together. All right, another type of sweat gland or sudiferous gland are going to be apocrine sweat glands. And now these are going to be simple coiled tubular glands that are going to secrete into hair follicles. And in this picture, we have this apocrine gland right here, and it's going to secrete straight into then the hair follicle. Okay, so right into there. And so we find this within regions of the armpits, the nipples, the groin, and the anus. So the secretion here is going to be a little bit different because it's going to be thicker and cloudier because it's mostly made of proteins and lipids. When we have bacteria growing in this environment, this is where we have a distinct odor to these regions, and everybody has a unique community of bacteria that has its own odor associated with it. So when we look at this microscope image of the apocrine gland, you can see a little bit different compared to merocrine, where these cells are going to be a little bit larger in terms of like columnar size compared to the last one, which is a little bit more cuboidal with that epithelium. All right, and the last type of gland are sebaceous glands, and these are going to secrete oily sebum into hair follicles or directly onto skin surfaces. And so here we have the example of a sebaceous gland. And in this image, we also have the sebaceous gland that's going to directly empty its sebum into the hair follicle. So importance here is that it provides lubrication and it helps to prevent from drying of hair and skin. Also, relatively is going to be inactive during childhood, but then once we hit puberty, these secretions are going to significantly increase, and also helps to contribute to, for some kids to have acne once they hit puberty.